Clemson finally fixed something on offense.
You are Locked On Clemson, your daily podcast on the Clemson Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Tiger fans? Morgan Thomas here, Clemson fan, Clemson grad, host and producer of Locked On Clemson, part-time host and producer over on 105.5 FM The Roar. And thank you so much for making Locked On Clemson your first listen of the day. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, now the number one sports podcast network out there. And that is because of viewers and listeners like you, everydayers that come in and listen to the show Monday through Friday, every single week. Stick with me as we talk all things Clemson athletics and a lot of football, because there's a lot of football to be discussed. Before we get into it, though, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. The college football playoff is here, and FanDuel is the best place to get in the action all playoff long. Visit FanDuel.com to get your college football playoff boost every game day. And we've got a lot to talk about because Clemson has done something that we did not think that they would do. Today is not a show about quarterbacks. We've done that. We'll do it again. I promise you. Today is about something different, and honestly, something that we all agree Clemson badly needed. Because for weeks now, the portal cycle has been about what? The defense, not the offense, all about the defense, all about fixing the holes on defense, the players that have left, replenishing those areas that they've not been able to recruit, fixing those gaps. Not only fixing those gaps, but finding more speed from the defense. So finding ways to improve the defense through their speed, and then also getting tougher on defense. Guys that want to go after the ball, guys that are going to tackle better, and going to be able to improve what Tom Allen can do and how he can call plays. And let me make sure I'm clear here. All of that mattered and continues to matter. But if you're a Clemson fan, which I know you are because you're listening to this, but you know what the truth is that defense alone was never going to be the only way or all you needed to do to restore belief in the fan base. And that is how Clemson was stuck at the end of last week. We all talked about how Clemson seems to be, in large part, ignoring the offense altogether. Now, I told you that I felt as if Clemson could kind of hold still on offense. As long as they keep stacking up dudes on defense, then you may have a formula to win 8, 9, 10 games with Christopher Vizzina. I had hoped that we would see some opportunities through the offensive line and improving that. And I still believe that Clemson needs to do that. But Clemson did something that was pretty shocking, I think, to all of us, but honestly agreed amongst all of us, is that it was much needed. And that's when they landed Chris Johnson Jr., the former Miami guy, the former SMU guy, running back, speedster, not a quarterback, not an offensive lineman. Yeah, you heard that right. A running back, and one that could quietly change how explosive Clemson is in 2026 on the offensive side of the ball. Today's show is simple. Segment 1, we're going to get into Chris Johnson and why it may matter more than you realize. Segment 2, we're going to talk about Chad Morris and why this is a sign that maybe taking Chad Morris was a good thing. And then segment 3, we'll finish everything up with what I told you we'd talk about, which is the quarterback and how Clemson needs to continue to address that. But let's start everything with Chris Johnson and the Chris Johnson Jr. effect. First of all, I don't want to pitch that he is some sort of savior to this team for 2026. I don't really believe that he needs to be leaned upon as a savior to the offense, because they do have a lot of other weapons that deserve respect. And he may not be a Heisman candidate. I don't know if he's going to get that significant amount of touches to be a Heisman candidate. And he may not be a full-on guarantee to kind of just be a guy who you can depend on every single down, but there's something that he brings to the table that Clemson hasn't had in years. And that is the speed that can scare defenses. Now, 2025 was frustrating because they had guys that were scaring defenses, but not all of them were really on the field at the same time. There was one game, and it didn't really last that long, where they had all three guys out there, Wesco, Moore, and Antonio Williams. And even you could add in Adam Randall, but he was still trying to figure out things at that point against LSU. But then Antonio Williams got hurt. And then when Antonio Williams got healthy, Bryant Wesco got hurt. Later on in the season, TJ Moore started to settle in, but Cade Klubnik really kind of didn't seem to lean in on TJ as much as we would like. So for too long, Clemson's offense and under Garrett Riley and Cade Klubnik had become predictable. Just defenses not only didn't have to get too stressed about it, but they just really didn't have anybody significantly that could scare you. They could sit around and rally the defenders, and they could keep the game close and not have to worry about anything getting out of hand from the offensive side of the ball. And you could probably even say that to the defensive side of the ball. But just be specific to the offense. Outside of Bryant Wesco, who really scared you a ton? Now, Antonio Williams scared you, but he far too often was the only guy Cade Klubnik would look at. TJ Moore would scare you, but far too often he would be ignored. And then Bryant Wesco got injured. So there hasn't been, and if you add Adam Randall into the mix, unfortunately, Garrett Riley seemed to forget about Adam Randall when they needed him. When it seemed like the fan base were demanding it more Adam Randall, Garrett Riley was kind of clueless about it. So the biggest thing that we saw from 2025 is that all these years of us being able to count on other defenses being intimidated by Clemson, the intimidation factor was going away. And, day in and day out, or play in and play out, having to focus on one guy that you can't let him beat you deep. It was hard outside of Bryant Wesco. Chris Johnson, to me, improves this team in that fear factor immediately. This is a player who averaged nearly 7 yards per carry at the Power 4 level. He ran a state title winning. He was a state title winning runner many times, 100 meter, 200 meter, who can turn a mistake from a linebacker into a major problem for the entire defense. And if a guy's only going to get 10 to 12 touches, you want him to have that kind of scary speed, because that kind of scary speed makes linebackers hesitate, makes safeties widen out, makes edges think twice. And those types of things, even if you're not getting a ton of touches, dictates what the defense is going to do. Suddenly, it makes it a little bit easier on Gideon Davidson. It makes that play action that Christopher Vizzina is going to run a little bit more meaningful. It makes you to have a solid, scary dude at a jet motion. All that causes stress for a defense. And that's why this move is bigger than just a stat line, bigger than just being an offensive player. It doesn't just add yards. It doesn't just add a running back. It adds fear. And also, it is great to see a failure of CJ Spiller's recruiting come back and become a success in the portal. Because if you don't get them the first time around, that's the great thing about nowadays in college football. You can get them in the second chance, just like with Jeremiah Alexander. They didn't get him the first time around, but you get him the second time. You didn't get Chris Johnson Jr. when they went after him the first time, but you get him now the second time. They moved when opportunity appeared, and that's something that we've desperately wanted from this Clemson coaching staff. The old Clemson would have said, we like the guys we have. The new Clemson said, hey, let's find a spot, make us better, and let's go after this guy. That, my friends, is progress from this Clemson coaching staff. All right, hey, let's get to segment 2, talking about Chad Morris and that behavior being changed across the board right here on Locked On Clemson. The college football playoff is here, and FanDuel is giving all customers even more ways to get in on the action every single game day of the playoffs. Because right now, every college football playoff game day, FanDuel users get a profit boost waiting for them in the app. Here's what I love about it. You get to use the profit boost on bets you already feel good about. Ride that favorite, take a shot on the underdog, or build a parlay around players and moments that you believe will decide the game. Then you can apply the profit boost and go after even bigger winnings. And when you win, FanDuel pays out instantly, which is perfect when you're in playoff football mode. So FanDuel is the best place to get in on the action all playoff long. So visit FanDuel.com to get your college football playoff profit boosts every game day. Hey, thank you so much for making Locked On Clemson your first listen of the day. And thank you for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. If you haven't already, check out the Everydayer Club. It's new. It gives you access to ad-free audio feed of Locked On Clemson, and also gives you an invite to the members-only Locked On Everydayer Club Discord server, which includes a group chat just for listeners of this show. So you can go over to lockedonclemson.supercast.com or tap the link in the show notes to learn more. I appreciate it again. You can always follow me in between episodes over on X at the Morgan T Show. Segment 2, we're going to bring ourselves back into this and talk about Chad Morris and how he's already seemingly changing the behavior of the coaching staff. And that's how important this role and this move could be for Clemson. It's not just about the person of Chad Morris. It's not just about going back to the past. Sometimes it's about, bringing in someone who can not be a yes man. Honestly, when you look back at it, Clemson and Dabo has surrounded himself with too many yes men, and that has gotten him to where he's at. Now there's a process of getting out of it, because Chad Morris going in and getting someone like Chris Johnson Jr., that is, to me, the fingerprints of Chad Morris. And that doesn't happen if he's not there. The staff went into the portal window, and we could clearly see what the strategy was. The strategy was hold still on offense and go full send on defense. I mean, it wasn't a secret. And even if it was at first, you can't be a clueless idiot about it when you see how many guys they landed on defense first, seemingly without ever even inviting anyone on offense or even talking about anyone publicly on offense. So it wasn't a secret. Rebuild the defense first, fast, and in a hurry. Under Tom Allen, get him the guys that he needs to be more successful on defense, and replenish all of the losses that they had and the failures in the recruiting process to get guys. That was step number 1. And I truly thought that we were in for a portal offseason of 100% defense, 0% offense. And that's how we were going to have to wait and see what Clemson was going to do in 2026. That's how Clemson was going to rebuild for 2026. But within a week of Chad Morris being back and being around the staff, being around Dabo Swinney, and being in a role that, demands his voice being heard, the Tigers have pivoted. They pursued Chris Johnson Jr. They closed in hard on Chris Johnson Jr. They put up the money and they closed it and finished the deal quickly. And things like that, to me, matter, because for years, the biggest issue on offense wasn't just that they didn't have that fear factor like we talked about in segment 1. But it was also that there was a lot of yes men around on this team. And there still are some of those guys. And you know who I'm talking about, that I'm still worried about, that I still don't know if they have what it takes to kind of tell Dabo, this ain't working. And you need to serve me better by allowing me to do different than what you think. Chad Morris commands respect in this staff and in the office. Garrett Riley, what's one quote that you remember from Garrett Riley? What's one promise that you remember from Garrett Riley? What's one achievement that you remember from Garrett Riley where you're like, you know what, that guy did that? I can walk away from the Garrett Riley era, and I don't have much of a memory at all of anything that he truly brought to the table himself. It just never felt like that he took command of any of the staff meetings or the rooms that he was in. And it never felt like he was the guy to tell Dabo Swinney what it is and how it needs to be. But maybe, just maybe, Chad Morris is that guy, because there's history there, because there's trust there. And more importantly, Chad Morris actually has a vision and a scheme that he knows he wants to run. And Clemson needed speed again, and they wanted speed. Chad Morris demanded it, and they went out and they got a guy to add to this roster that can do that. Clemson wants to move players around, have that eye candy, and under Garrett Riley, they didn't have that. Get that motion and stress out the defense by changing the look. Maybe have the same play, but the movement of players and the alignment that they were in, bringing in that motion adds in more stress. More stress and more multiple looks. You know, it may look the same from pre-snap, but you're going to get something a lot different because of alignment, because of routes, because of personnel that's out there. Eye candy, if you will. Stress horizontally. Forcing defenses to overthink things pre-snap puts them in a disadvantage once the ball is snapped and the play is underway. And then if they're in a disadvantage pre-snap, then all you need is to get the ball into the hands of your talent, like a Chris Johnson Jr., like a Wesco, a Moore, and others. Clemson football at its peak was something that was scary, something that had a lot of speed, something that was going to use a lot of that window dressing, if you will. And you were not going to know what was coming at you until it was too late. That was Clemson football at its peak, surrounded by guys that just had raw talent. You know, a lot of those guys that won those national championships weren't longtime NFLers that were just best of the best of the best, but they were good at what they could do at the college level, and they worked well together at the college level. Now, is Chad Morris a guaranteed winner and a sure thing? No. I mean, there's still a lot of unknowns that you get with bringing back Chad Morris. Has he called plays recently? Well, you've already reminded me this in the comments. No, he has not called plays recently. Is the skepticism fair about Chad Morris? Oh, absolutely. It's fair. But he's already putting his fingerprints on this team at the very beginning of the offseason in a way that even if you were to keep Garrett Riley around would have never happened. I truly believe that Chad Morris is part of the reason why Dabo Swinney is being forced to adapt instead of just justifying we like who we have. That alone is worth its weight in gold because, as we know, the identity is not built in August. And if you still don't have an identity in August, well, then you've got a 2025 Clemson team. The identity and the roster is built in January. And then you perfect it into the fall and you get it rolling into the football season. That is what makes a team successful. And Chad Morris, whether you like that hire or not, seems to be demanding respect and demanding a lot of opportunities from Dabo Swinney to kind of sit back and say, hey, you need to do it my way because I know what I want. All right, hey, finishing up. If you're an everydayer, I know you're still with me. Stick with me because we'll come back to segment 3 and we'll talk about Christopher Vizzina right here on Locked On Clemson. The new year is here, and it's the perfect time to reset your routine and refresh your space. If you're spending more time at home, you might as well love how it looks and feels. That's why you should turn to Wayfair. It's a one-stop shop for getting your home back on track. From bedding to mattresses to storage solutions for every room, Wayfair makes it easy to start the year fresh. Wayfair has everything you need for a full home refresh all in one place. Whether you're updating your living room, organizing your space, or upgrading your work from home setup, Wayfair's huge selection makes it easy to find exactly what works for your style and budget. Downstairs, we got a new rug, a carpet, or not carpet, but rug for the living room, for the great room. And it just really just changed everything. It's crazy how just one piece can change everything. You go over to wayfair.com, you can see how just one thing can really turn things around in your room and make it look like a new room. So get organized, get refreshed, and get back on track this new year for way less. Head over to wayfair.com right now to shop all things home. That's WAYFAIR.com. Wayfair, every style, every home. All right. Thank you. Welcome in. Segment number 3 here of Locked On Clemson. If you haven't already, in between episodes, you can follow me over on X at The Morgan T Show. If you also haven't already, hit that follow, hit that subscribe so you never miss another episode of Locked On Clemson. Why all of this needs to come back to Christopher Vizzina in segment 3. Well, let's land this plane honestly for you. All of this only works if Clemson can have a quarterback that they can trust. Because you could add all the speed in the world, you can add all the motion in the world, you can add all the weapons in the world, but if you cannot trust your quarterback, then the play is stagnant. Then the drives are dead. And none of it actually matters. And Dabo Swinney has made it clear, even though he hasn't come out on the podium and said it, Christopher Vizzina is obviously the guy. And at least he's the guy for now, or at least the starting point for now. So Dabo Swinney feels as if Christopher Vizzina has worked his way up, has developed, and he has earned his opportunity to get his shot. And whether fans agree or not, this seems to be what path Dabo has chosen for Clemson for 2026. So the big question for everyone is, will this path actually work? And I believe that this path will actually work. You don't have to get a big-time superstar quarterback out there, because I do think that under Christopher Vizzina and what Clemson is building in the transfer portal and what they brought in from the recruiting ranks and the guys they have returning, that this path can work. Clemson can get to the ACC championship game and beyond with Christopher Vizzina at the quarterback position, at the starting quarterback position. Number one, though, the running game has to matter. When we look at these playoff games, yes, you could say that all the top 4 teams had a transfer portal quarterback. I don't disagree with you. But it seems as if the path chosen is Christopher Vizzina. So considering the path chosen, what's the next thing you need to make sure you have? And that is, you need to have a running game that you can count on, that can hit early, and that can really keep the defense honest and not force you into one way of just throwing, like what we saw too many times under Garrett Riley and last season. That's why picking up Chris Johnson Jr. and having his impact on the offense with his speed and his ability to make big plays, even in a short amount of opportunities, that's why it matters. That's why the development and growth of Gideon Davidson matters a ton in 2026. He's going to now be your star running back, and he has everything that he needs to be that guy. every single thing you would want out of a star running back, Davidson brings to the table and maybe more. So you have your lead back, your superstar guy that has a lot of life left on his legs. And then you have Chris Johnson Jr. that also could be one of those guys that could keep defenses honest and scare you. Davidson can scare you. Johnson can scare you. After that, though, you know what you can't do. You know those guys can't scare you or won't be able to scare you if your offensive line is absolutely trashed. What we saw in 2025 was trash. A lot of it I blame Matt Luke. And if he doesn't get a big-time offensive lineman from the transfer portal, I'm going to still have a lot of question marks around him. One thing you can say is that he's recruiting well from the high school ranks. But Clemson needs offensive linemen that can win today. And I don't want to see that same 5 that we saw against South Carolina. I know we won't because there'll be guys that are leaving. But Clemson has got to improve the offensive line. It cannot be ignored. The starting 5 they march out there from the very beginning has to be guys that can work well together and fit with what Chad Morris wants to do. You cannot build confidence in a running game. You cannot build up a superstar running back if your offensive line is trash. You cannot get your speedster running back out in the open if your offensive line is trash. You cannot build confidence in Christopher Vizzina if your offensive line does not protect him. As much as I was disappointed and frustrated when Cade Klubnik and his decision-making, a lot of where he was at and the situations he was in is because the offensive line was no good. The last thing is Clemson has to know who their superstars are in which situation. And I do believe that Chad Morris brings that to the table, if anything. He knows a clear path to how to get superstars involved. Last time he was with Clemson, he said, we're going to have a 1,000-yard receiver and a 1,000-yard rusher, and we're going to do it every single season. And he did that. He cashed that check. The offense has to be able to find advantages quickly, not hope for them. It cannot be spaghetti on the wall as if it's felt like with Garrett Riley. Christopher Vizzina needs to be functional, serviceable, and if he takes a little bit of a step forward, this team can work. If he stagnates and he can't get the protection he needs, this team could go back to falling backwards, even with a lot of brand new talent on the team, because Clemson needs to be able to survive an entire season with a healthy offensive line and getting the ball into their playmakers. Is Clemson with Christopher Vizzina built to survive a shootout? Or are they built to survive a close game, a physical game, a defense-heavy game, a run-driven game with explosiveness added in here and there? To me, that's a little bit more of the blueprint than just a run and gun, score all over you type team. But one thing that I like from Clemson this offseason that I was worried about is Clemson is not clueless. Dabo Swinney is not clueless. It is choosing the path that they believe will be the most successful for 2026. Clemson tried to develop new guys from within. That didn't work out. Dabo Swinney tried to hire the big name guys. That didn't work out. Going back to Chad Morris and someone that he trusts and possibly could throw in some modern adjustments over the years where he's been able to learn instead of be a coach, it could improve this team back to where it needs to be. I'm not saying this is a national championship team. I will not say that. But under Christopher Vizzina and a retooled team that works well together, it could be a team that can get back to the ACC championship game, and then that gives you more opportunities. Is it a risky decision keeping or bringing in Morris? Yeah, it is. But is it understandable? When you really kind of sit back and think about it, there's a lot of things that make sense about it too. And that is where we are. You got to take some risks to get some reward. Hey, I know all about that. I left a cushy job to go and become an airline pilot, taking a huge risk to go after a bigger reward later on down the road. Now, I know Clemson needs a big turnaround quicker than 2 years like I am, but that's where we are. This is a risk with Chad Morris, and hopefully it will pay off with a good reward in 2026. No, Clemson hasn't fixed everything, but they are adding pieces to the team that are real and that can be impacts immediately for 2026. Thank you for tuning in to Locked On Clemson. Tomorrow we'll continue the discussion about where Clemson is going forward, and also try to throw in some stuff about the Clemson basketball team. They are now a top 25 basketball team. Can you believe it? Make sure you follow and subscribe to Locked On Clemson so you get all the latest episodes. You can follow me in between episodes on X at The Morgan T Show. If you never miss an episode, well, the Everydayer Club is for you. You can get Locked On Clemson ad-free, plus a members-only Discord access, and more. Head over to lockedonclemson.supercast.com to join the club. For those of you watching over on video, we'll send you over to the first ever 24/7 national Locked On Podcast Network YouTube channel. If you're listening on audio, make sure your second listen is Locked On College Football. And as always, Tiger fans, we'll see you tomorrow, and we'll see you at the top of the hill.